Tia, the polls have been largely very tight, and then there was this surprise poll this weekend out of Iowa, putting Kamala Harris ahead. Democrats just leapt on it as evidence something is happening. Why does this one poll matter?
Well, I think the one poll matters because for Democrats, it was something tangible for them to hold on to that indicates a Harris surge. Even if the poll doesn't turn out to predict the actual outcome in Iowa, what it's an indicator of is that things are starting to break Harris's way, that women voters and particularly older female voters are coming out for Harris in ways that could really shift an election in her favor in some of the battleground states. That's how people are reading this Iowa poll.
And Chris, I suppose older female voters, if you're thinking 65 plus, were teenagers when Roe v. Wade first happened. Are you hearing what Tia is, that Democrats are seeing this as potentially a countrywide trend?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's looking for even the littlest bit of momentum because the race is so close. I think we will either look back and say, well, that was a canary in a coal mine. If Kamala Harris winds up winning Wisconsin or Michigan and it's fueled by older voters, older female voters, excuse me, and Roe is a big issue, or, well, that was an outlier and Donald Trump won Iowa and it didn't tell us all that much. I mean, that's the thing. I wish I could be more definitive. I do think Kamala Harris, should she win, the Dobbs decision will be critical to that, and female voters who have made up a majority of the vote since 1984 in presidential races will be at the center of it.
So, Kaylee, you have done like a ton of work about polling, and I'm curious what's different about polling this time. The last two cycles of polls were broadly wrong, I think, but I don't remember seeing as many as what we're seeing now. What is happening?
Well, I think a lot of people remember 2016 as being a big polling miss year. And actually, the national level polls were pretty close that year. They were only off by about 2 points. If you remember, Clinton won the popular vote that year, but she lost the election, of course. And a big part of that was not accounting for education level in the samples. So they fixed that in 2020, but then something else went wrong. And pollsters actually aren't totally sure what went wrong in 2020. Part of it might have just had to do with the pandemic and all of the chaos that ensued from that and all the differences to voting. But this year, no, they've continued to make some adjustments. And there is some hope that it's a little more accurate this year, especially when you look at the 2022 polls from that midterm year. Those were some of the most accurate we've had in decades. So there is a chance that this year will be a little bit better, but we're not going to know until it's all said and done.
Just to pick up something you said there are polls, but then there are partisan polls, right? So I think, unless I'm mistaken, we're seeing a surge in polling that are, very clearly Republican polls, for example. What is the point of those? Is it to get the numbers right, or is it to maybe create a narrative?
Well, I mean, surge is a relative term. There's way more nonpartisan and independent polls out there in the ecosystem. And so as a result, those polling averages aren't really getting bent one way or the other. And good aggregators like the New York Times take into account if it's a partisan pollster and, weight it accordingly. But we have seen, over the last couple of weeks, a few extra polls from certain firms that either are known to be affiliated with the Republican Party, sponsored by Republican politicians, or else just kind of have leaned that way over time. It's sort of caused an uproar. And I think it is more so about the fact that the race is so close. Both sides are kind of looking for anything to hang on to. So Republicans are looking at those polls and seeing, see, Trump's got momentum. He's surging ahead. He's going to win this thing. Democrats are looking at it and saying, see, all the polls are skewed. They're flooding the zone. In reality, Harris is going to win. And it's getting covered by these skewed polls. The reality is it's a really close race, and unfortunately that's not very satisfying for people, but that's the truth.
I mean, the old chestnut, the only poll that matters is the one on Election Day. The state that you're in, Tia, Georgia, this swing state that could get results out early, the one Donald Trump famously maintained falsely that he really won last time. What strikes you about what's happening in Georgia right now?
Well, we know that there's been record early voting turnout, but it's hard to read into that. Again, we still expect Georgia to be close. What we don't know is how many of those people who voted early would have had voted on Election Day in the past. There are a lot of new voters. Democrats think that the new voters skew towards them. They think that the imbalance thus far of more women than men voting skews well towards them. But again, some of that could be rebalanced on election day. There's still so much we don't know about what the electorate will look like when all is said and done. But we do think Georgia is going to be close. I still, I maintain that Trump could win, Harris could win, but either way, it's going to be close.
Chris, does anything surprise you at this late stage?
I always like to retain the possibility of being surprised. I will say, and this isn't surprising, but I think if he does lose, Donald Trump will look back on sort of from last Sunday, the Madison Square Garden rally, to his campaign event in Green Bay, Wisconsin, where he said, "I'm going to protect women whether they want me to or not," to the Liz Cheney controversy over, she should have 9 guns pointed in her face, even to his rallies more recently in the last 48 hours, where he's just sort of not been on message at all. He's never really that on message, but at the end, when undecided voters are actually paying attention, is when you want to drive home that message. I have not heard enough from him candidly about, look, Kamala Harris was the vice president for 3.5 years. What has she done? I've heard a lot of personal stuff, personal attacks, stuff about the media, stuff about the 2020 election. I'm not sure undecided voters care about that. So if he does lose, I think that loss will be laid directly at his feet in his campaign over the last 9 or 10 days.
All right, 20 seconds for each of you, Kaylee and Tia. One thing you're watching for tomorrow. Kaylee, start with you.
Oh, one thing, Pennsylvania, all eyes are on that state to see how things break down, because I think that that's really going to be the pivot point state in all of this. And I think, sorry, really quickly, another thing I'm curious about is whether this is actually going to end up with tight results or not. There's, within the polling error, a margin of polling error, a chance for either candidate to have a pretty decisive victory and get all the swing states. So I'm curious if that might happen for one or the other.
We just don't know. Tia, one last thought to you.
I guess, in Georgia, again, are men able to catch up? Some of the metro Atlanta counties, rural Georgia said they were having better turnout. Will the metro Atlanta counties that we know are Democratic counties, will they catch up on election day? I'll just be looking to really see, after all is said and done on election day, what it could tell us about the demographics of Georgia voters and how that could indicate the final result.
What an interesting thing awaits everyone. All right, Kaylee Rogers, Tia Mitchell, Chris Cillizza, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.